Hello, my name is Ariel Detwiler. I'm a freelancer, private teacher, and reed maker in the Twin Cities, and I'm here to help you get some good practice techniques for your MYS audition this year. First, I wanted to talk about creating a good video audition. It's unique that you get to do video auditions this year because MYS usually does in-person auditions. Video auditions are actually very popular in the professional world, so we see them a lot. But it's really important to create a video that is compelling to your audience. So first off, you want to make sure that you can see both of your hands. With the bassoon, that's a little more complicated, so you might want to try and get someone to hold the camera for you or prop it up some way so that you can see both your hands moving. Because the bassoon is kind of an awkward instrument, you can't really put the camera on your stand because you can't really see both hands. You can just see your face. The other thing is you do want to be able to see your face. So if you're too far over this way, you might not be able to see your face and how you're playing. But if you're angled a little bit to the left of your camera, you'll be able to have a really good solid angle of your face so that they can see that you're actually playing what you're playing. The next thing is you have to do the video in one take. So don't worry so much about making little mistakes. As long as your audition is solid and you can hear every single note, you'll be great. They can tell if you're doing a good job. So take a couple different takes of your video and pick the best one and send it in. Don't be too worried about every little mistake that you make. Everybody makes mistakes. So I wanted to first talk about the Philharmonic Excerpt, the Dvorak. This is from a symphony and during a part that has a lot of different things going on, but this part at the beginning, at K, is not necessarily the melody, as you can tell. It's just eighth notes. The reason they probably added this was because it sets up the tempo for the melody that comes at the marcato section. So, this is what it should sound like. So a couple tips to make this really, really effective. First of all, the staccatos on the eighth notes should really be observed. Those are fortissimo staccatos, so make sure they're strong and effective. Guess what happens after those eighth notes on those rests? The horns have huge lines. So you're setting them up. They play bum, 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 bum. So you have to make sure that you set them up for what they have to do, and you're equaling their strength. It's really important in excerpts, in any excerpt. This is what makes excerpt playing so unique, is that we get to think about everything else that's going on in the orchestra. So really understanding what's going on underneath you, who you're playing with, and what role you play is important to learning excerpts. So when you get to the marcato section, you all of a sudden take over the melody with all the low voices. It's this really intense part. Now, if you played it long, that would be kind of boring, right? But marcato means separated and strong. So you want to slightly accent every note, but especially that low E. Another trick for that low E is to make sure that you're using the left pinky underneath the E flat key. So the lower pinky key in the E, using on the low E can actually create a really big resonant sound and equal out the intonation for that low E. So every single low E that you see in this excerpt, try and use that key. So if we play it, strong starts to each note like an accent, and separation between every single note. Now, the other thing that you want want to think about in this section especially, once you hit those fortissimo sondos, you want to make sure that you are counting in your head. It's a pretty steady tempo that you're taking here. Can be a little faster, but make sure that you're thinking the tempo the whole time, because they are going to, if they're listening to your audition, they're going to be clicking along with you, seeing if you can stay in tempo. It's a really, really good skill to have to make sure you're staying in tempo. Also, before the end of the excerpt, there are 2 measures rest. They want those 2 measures in there. Don't cut them short. Don't push ahead and just play the D. Try to make sure that you count every single beat in those 2 measures, because there are things going on in the orchestra in that part. The D just brings the whole excerpt back together and ends it. So good luck on your Philharmonic audition. Now let's talk about the Repertory audition. This excerpt is probably the hardest one of the 3. It's funny because it's the middle excerpt, but it is definitely the hardest. The thing about this excerpt is the tempo says 112. Half note equals 112. If you listen to multiple different recordings to try and figure out what tempo to take, people take this anywhere from 100 to 112. So try making 100 your goal at first. If you can't quite make it to 112 cleanly, it's better to do it slower and get more accuracy with your notes. All of these little grace notes kind of trip us up a little bit. And if you listen to the recording, who are you playing with this with? Everyone. Everyone is playing this. All the strings, all the woodwinds, some of the brass. So, and then we split up about 3/4 of the way through the excerpt, and everybody kind of plays something different. But for the first, all of the 8 notes in this excerpt are played by everyone in the orchestra. You can't necessarily hear the bassoon in the recording, and that's typical of most excerpts. But you should be emulating what you're hearing in everyone else. So, for example, the strings, the violins are really prominent in this excerpt, so try and get the precision that they bring in your own playing. So, if we're playing it cleanly, it should sound something like this. All right. The hardest part in this excerpt to play cleanly is on the 3rd line with both grace notes, the grace note to the A and the grace note to the E. That's absolutely the hardest part of this excerpt. So I would isolate those 2 sections. There's a bunch of different ways that you can practice this to really make it solid. So first, I would go through the entire excerpt, playing it very slowly and making sure you get every note without the grace notes. We're going to throw in the grace notes later. Now, when you kick up the tempo and you've got all the notes right, I want you to play only 1 beat at a time, ending on the next downbeat. And then add in the grace notes. This will start to uncover all those little minor details that you might not be getting 100% right. And that's where you have to go back and practice certain things. Say in the beginning measure, that measure is easy for you. But then when you get to the D, C sharp, D, F sharp, that F sharp doesn't speak really clearly for you. So you have to go back and figure out what the problem is. Is it a finger timing issue? Is it a support issue? Is it a voicing issue? Just make sure that you have goals leading into every downbeat. So now, also, check out the first measure. Then the end of that line. It's the exact same first 3 notes, but we have a different grace note. If you can relate those 2 parts to each other, it makes it so much easier to practice. Just making sure. Then, if we look at the second half of the excerpt, the exact same thing happens again. We've got A, G sharp, A, G sharp, A at the end of the line. Right? And they end differently, but they start on the same notes with different grace notes. So, if you see the same thing twice, try and overemphasize the changes the second time because it makes it more interesting. Especially because we have a grace note that changes and is starting on the same note that we end on. See that E and on the third line at the very end in measure 120? We've got an E that repeats. So really kick that grace note E to make sure that it sounds like a different note that you're hitting. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the sforzandos. If you play the C before the A sforzando louder, the C is naturally going to sound a little bit louder just because of the nature of the instrument. So try and come back a little bit on the C to leave room for that sforzando on the A. So instead of playing, because there's no forte piano there, we're going to start on like a mezzo forte on the C and crescendo to the A to make sure that the A is emphasized. Right? Next, we're talking about the offbeats. Sometimes we see offbeats and think we should hit the offbeats harder than the downbeats. In this case, because this excerpt goes by so quickly and we're in 2, really try and emphasize that we're still in 2. So, we're going to emphasize each beat. Alright? Always emphasizing that we're in 2. Now, the next hard part that we have to get over is the F sharp A transition. Really, it's just a fingering issue. Making sure you're really, really precise with your fingerings. So, another tip to help with your F sharp is you can actually lift up your first left finger, your left hand first finger, to help you get that note to speak. It won't change the pitch, it won't change anything about the note, it just helps it speak better. Alright, so now, just make sure that you're getting really supported on those high notes to make sure that F sharp speaks correctly. Alright, good. Now, remember that throughout this excerpt, accuracy is key. All fortissimo all the way through. So what you want to think about when you're going through this excerpt at tempo is keeping your air going no matter what. Because yes, the notes are difficult, yes, it's fast. However, we want to keep our air going no matter what. So, the only time I'm going to breathe is at 118 before the next section. See that? So, try and plan out your breaths in this one to keep your air going. Good. Let's go over the Symphony Excerpt. This one actually happens directly before the previous Repertory Excerpt, but it's a completely different feel. The last excerpt we talked about was literally everyone in the orchestra playing the same thing, right? This one is a woodwind feature. If you listen to the orchestra part, this is a soli between all of the woodwinds for at least half of it. The time that it changes is in 103. That's when we start to break away from the entire woodwind section and start to be more supportive. So, for the first half of this excerpt, try and think, I'm an honorary woodwind. High woodwind, I mean. Alright, so let's talk about how to practice this one effectively. First, Again, the tempo is half note equals 112. This section is a little more relaxed than the repertory excerpt, only because it's more lyrical. The repertory excerpt is more technical. So, for the symphony excerpt, you really want to make sure that you're thinking about where the line is going. It's pretty obvious where it's going, but you want to make sure that you breathe where you need to make sure this line keeps going. Also, there are little cues for musicality that they give you in the music. Those little crescendos and decrescendos can actually really help your musical line take flight. So really pay attention to those. Now, when you're thinking about high woodwinds, a cute high woodwind part, what do you think of? Staccatos, right? Da, 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 da. It's very precise. It's very floating. And you want to make sure that it's very light and very, very moving forward. So the first time you practice it, try and think about that line going forward all the way up to the G and then ending on the G again. So the G at the top is our goal, and then we come back down to the second G. Now, when you're practicing those 16th notes in between, really make sure that your rhythm is super solid, because you have triplets, you have 16ths, and you have 8ths. So really making sure your rhythm is super solid no matter what. The 16th notes in 93 are really embellishments. So think of the D leading up to the G by way of the E and the F sharp. If it weren't there, it wouldn't really matter that much, right? But it kind of gives it a little bit of sprinkles on top. Also, it helps with our crescendo up. Now, when you go up to the high A, make sure that high A is your peak. And then we go up again to the D in measure 101, all the way back down. Once you get to the measure 103, you're going to see some triplets leading up to 8 notes. If you listen to the recording, the high woodwinds have solid triplets starting on beat 2 all the way up to beat 1 of the next measure. The bassoon, however, has 8 notes in the second half of the measure. So we kind of start the woodwinds off, and then we're merely supportive. So that's why you get the sforzando on the high G, and then you come away almost immediately to just be supportive. On that second one, it goes up to a high A. You might think that the high A is the peak, but it's not. Make sure that the G on beat 1 is the peak, and then you come away all the way to the end. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope you do really, really awesome on your audition. Good luck!